Will Jesus know you? That's the most important question that we can ever ask. It's important that we know Jesus, but will he know us? Will he know you? Join us on this podcast as we examine Scripture through the lens of making sure that we will be known by Jesus. Thank you for joining us today on the Will Jesus Know You podcast with Jason Butler. At the time that I'm taping this episode, it is absolutely impossible to not know what is going on in our world. We are at war. There is chaos and there's war in the Middle East. It's impossible not to know. When you turn on the news or when you get on social media, it is impossible to avoid the fact that the United States and Israel are bombing Iran. At the same time, Iran is firing indiscriminately at all of its neighbors, not just Israel, but they're firing at nations that were listed as friends of Iran just a few weeks ago. If you have managed to stay off of the news or off of social media, at a minimum, you've noticed that this war is hitting the pocketbooks of most Americans as gas prices have gone up since the bombing began. That's why I'm saying it's virtually impossible to not know what's going on and to not be affected. Now, some people support this bombing campaign. Some people are against it. And many of the stances that we choose, whether we're for or against, many of the stances that we choose are chosen based on a political affiliation or simply due to the fact that it's just not convenient to my gas budget, right? But that's not where we're going today. For the next 2 episodes, today as well as next week, we're going to take a look at this conflict from a biblical perspective. We're going to try to bring out some points for us to think about, to pray about, things that go deeper than a political affiliation or a diplomatic affiliation or how this is simply affecting our bank accounts. When it comes to the deeper biblical implications or explanations, my concerns is many of us are just oblivious to what this war means, why it's happening, how it affects us. But if you followed our ministry for any length of time, you know that we have been talking about this happening for literally 4 or 5 years. It's been brewing for a lot longer than that. We're going to talk about that today. It's been brewing for a while, but these events that are taking place right now are something that we've been watching, we've been predicting for 4 or 5 years. Back in 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel, our thoughts immediately went to how is this going to affect the potential war between Iran and Israel? It has to happen. Then when Iran and Israel had a 12-day war in 2025 that resulted in the United States engaging to support Israel, when the U.S. dropped bunker buster bombs on Iran's nuclear facilities, we had this feeling that the war had started, but it was not complete. It was not finished. It was like it had begun and paused. Now, if you're new to our ministry, maybe you haven't been taught how this affects you. Either way, maybe we just need a refresher on what all this means. What does this war mean to us? What does it mean biblically, spiritually, not politically, not diplomatically? So for the next 2 episodes, we're going to focus on a few things. We're going to discuss the leaders of Iran and why they're acting the way they're acting. Why are they doing what they're doing? We're going to discuss their end times ideology and how that affects their actions, decisions. We're going to talk about how this affects the people of Iran. Are the people of Iran bad people, or do they just have bad leadership? So we're going to talk about how this affects them as we try to get to know them better. We're going to talk about how this affects the United States, probably more than you might expect. It's more than gas prices, I'll tell you that. And then finally, we're going to talk about how this might be, or is it, fitting into biblical prophecies that need to be fulfilled still, like the Jeremiah 49 war, the Ezekiel 38 war. Are we in those prophecies? Yes, no, maybe. We're going to discuss all these things. But I want to start by explaining how we got here, in case you don't know. A little bit of history. This fight is not something that just brewed up overnight. This is a fight that has been brewing since 1979, roughly 47 years. As I deliver this information, I promise that I'm not being political. I'm not going there. I'm going to give you some facts. And the first fact is that both parties, Democrats and Republicans, have gotten us into this place. The political system has not done well with this. I don't know that any of these people fully understood then what they were doing, nor do they fully understand now what the biblical implications are that are at stake. And again, that's how I'm trying to cover this. We're going to cover this biblically, not politically. So I'm not sure if they understand what they've done or how it's affected this. But some poor decisions have been made politically. Now, as I discuss this, I'm going to often refer to the American government. I'm not going to talk about Democrats. I'm not going to talk about Republicans. We're just going to talk about what our government has done. Previous to 1979, it's important to understand that Iran was actually a prosperous country, full of wealth, vibrance, and it was led by a presidential person. So they had a presidential structure, and they called him the Shah. For our discussion today, let's call the Shah a good guy from the world's perspective. Let's call him a good guy, the Shah. Let's say he was leading a good country. Again, from a world's perspective, it was a good country. Prosperous. They were doing well. But then a revolution began against the Shah in the late 70s. And we had a bad guy. We're going to call it the bad guy regime. We had a bad guy regime come against the good guys. Now, the American government did not help the good guys enough. That's a fact. And the bad guys overthrew the Shah. So the bad guys overthrew the good guys. Remember, the Shah was the government structure of Iran. That was the quote good guys, and now the bad guys came to power. So for starters, this is sort of our fault in a way. Our being America's fault, not yours, not mine. So we can't just wipe our hands and stick our heads in the sand and not care about what's happening roughly 6,300 miles away. The bad guys created a new government. We didn't put that government in. We just didn't do enough to help the good government stop the bad government. So the bad guys create a new government based on a leader being called an Ayatollah. That's a term you've probably heard. You've probably heard Shah, and you probably heard Ayatollah. The Shah was the good guy, presidential guy. He has a son today that's talked about that doesn't live in Iran. He was exiled. And then we have these Ayatollahs. There's been more than one. We'll discuss that here for a second. But the Ayatollah is an Islamic leader, specifically a Shiite Muslim. Now, we really don't have time for a full deep dive on this today. But Muslims are, for the most part, split into two camps. One of two camps. The Shiite Muslims, or Shia, or the Sunni Muslims. So we got the Shiites and the Sunnis, two different groups. Not all Muslims are the same, and that's important to understand. Their split happened around who they think was the successor to their Prophet Muhammad. Remember, the Prophet Muhammad started Islam, the Muslim faith, and these two groups split around who they think was the successor to their Prophet Muhammad. One group followed one path, one group followed another path. The Sunnis make up the majority. They make up 85 to 90% of the Muslim world, while the Shiite make up 10 to 15%. I know this is a world history lesson, but the Shiites are mostly in Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Bahrain, I said that wrong. While Sunnis make up Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, Indonesia, etc. So it's important to understand that both Shia and Sunnis have extremist wings that carry out terror. Not all Muslims are terrorists. I want to make that clear. And both Shias and Sunnis have extremist wings that carry out terror. But for the most part, Shiites are known to be more aggressive, more strategic, and more violent for political gain. Okay? So the Shah was a Shiite Muslim. Remember, he was a good guy and he was a Shiite Muslim. However, he was fairly secular. I mean, we can put that in terms of us in America today. There's a lot of people that call themselves Christians, and maybe they have some Christian values, but they're still just very secular in nature, and they're not really Jesus-believing, Jesus-following Christians like they would like you to think they are. And maybe that's what we have with the Shah. He was a Shiite Muslim, but he was a more secular guy, more secular in nature. He cared about the modernization and the wealth of his country. But then the Ayatollah regime, remember they're the bad guys, they take over, and they're much more devout, radical Shiite Muslims. Remember, Shiite Muslims make up just a small percentage of Muslims, 10 to 15%, but it's a small group of people causing a lot of problems throughout the world. We would call Iran now today, fast forward from the late 70s, we would call them the world's sponsor of terror. They are the one country that helps fund terrorism all over the world. But Iran wasn't always a Muslim country. This is just a little side note. We tend to think that Islam rules all over that entire part of the world, the Middle East, but actually Iran's pre-Islamic religion was called Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism. That's a mouthful. The important thing that I'm getting to is that radical Islamic terrorism didn't come into existence in Iran till 1979 when the Ayatollah took over. And it is not their religious history to even be Muslim. So we need to understand the history before the Shah, up through the Shah, and into the Ayatollah to understand where we are today. Okay, now since that time that these radicals established power in 1979, there have been two Ayatollahs. And somebody is going to be upset with how I say these names. There are multiple ways you can hear these names pronounced, but there have been two Ayatollahs and they have similar names. One is Khomeini or Khomeini. That starts with a KH and that's like a Khomeini. And then there's a Khamenei or Khamenei, depending on how you say it. I'm going to say Khomeini and Khomeini because that's easier, okay? Bear with me here. So we got Khomeini, he was the first one spelled with an O. Then we got Khamenei spelled with an A. I don't want you to get confused on that. It's kind of like when we talk about Elisha versus Elijah. They're very similar, but they're different people. Khomeini, or Khomeini, ruled from 1979 to 1989. He was the first Ayatollah, ruled for 10 years. He died, and then Khamenei, or Khamenei, reigned from that death in 1989 to his own death in 2026, just recently on the first day of this war. Okay, so this regime is very, very evil. Guys, if you disagree with him, if you simply live in the country and you disagree with him, you just die. They kill you. They will kill you in broad daylight. As a fear tactic, if you disagree with the regime, they're hanging people in broad daylight. If it's thought that a person in Iran is rising to popularity, this anti-regime, anti-Ayatollah, they simply just kill the person. They don't tolerate it. Now, pre-1979, pre-Ayatollahs, women were treated very well in Iran. They thrived in culture. Post-1979, women are treated as objects with no rights. We're going to talk more about that later, probably next week. You probably would recognize the full body, the full face coverings that they are required to wear under this Ayatollah regime. Pre-1979, you would see women dressed comparable to the United States women of that time. More modern. You can go find pictures. They were very modern. Women didn't have to completely cover up. They dressed in fashion. Post-1979, when the Ayatollahs come in with a radical regime, they changed things for women, and you can be jailed or killed if you're a woman and you show your face in public. It just happened a few years ago where some women came out in public, took off their hijabs, their face coverings, and they were ultimately killed by the regime for their rebellion. They were arrested and executed. Now, again, we're going to come back to the treatment of women later, next week's episode. The important part here is to understand how evil this regime is. They have slaughtered hundreds of thousands of people in their own country, not counting the number of people worldwide that have been killed by Iran or one of its proxies. We'll define that term in a minute. They rape, they cut off the heads of babies, they genitally mutilate their own people, they hang, and they do all these other gruesome things. As we discuss what is going on today, we need to keep a pulse on how evil these people are. Maybe the most evil people to ever walk this earth. Okay, so there's some history of how it started, how we got here. Now let's fast forward to more recent days. Remember, I'm just building up to why this bombing campaign started a few weeks ago. Iran began to build up their terror network with two goals in mind. Number one, and these aren't things I'm making up, these are things they declare. Every time they speak, they declare this. The number one goal they have is to destroy Israel. The number two goal is to destroy the United States. Again, this is not speculation. It's their words. They call the United States the big Satan, and they call Israel the little Satan. They chant death to America, death to Israel. These are chants, they're slogans for the Ayatollah's regime. As they built up arms in their country, weapons, they also built up militias in countries that surrounded Israel. We hear those militias called proxies. This means that they being Iran funds and arms militias in other areas outside of Iran with the intent to carry out the interests or objectives of Iran. That's what a proxy is. Specifically, they built up the Houthis in Yemen. You may hear that name. They built up Hamas in Gaza. They built up Hezbollah in Lebanon. And they built up some militias. They're just called pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria. In other words, if you look at a world map, they've surrounded Israel on all sides. They've slowly and methodically done this for 40 plus years. In fact, if we go back to October 7th, 2023, that was supposed to be a coordinated attack between Iran and all of its proxies against Israel. The goal was they were going to overwhelm the defenses of Israel, and everybody was going to come against Israel at once with a clear intent to destroy Israel. Here was the problem, though. Hamas went early. Hamas invaded before the plan was supposed to happen. Now, for us, as believers in Jesus, who believe in the sovereign plans of God, I would say that God did not allow that overwhelming attack. He confused the enemy to not be unified because God, is in control, and because the Bible promises that He will protect Jerusalem. He will protect Israel from destruction. When you hear that Israel is fighting a 7 or an 8 front war, you'll hear those terms, a 7 front war or an 8 front war. The 7 fronts include Iran plus their militias that they fund. And the 8th front is the media that's pushing such an anti-Semitic narrative of hatred towards Israel. And that's why I want to cover this, because if we're just getting the news on what's going on over there from the news, we're getting a slant, and we're getting a political slant depending on what station you watch. But we need to understand what's really going on over there and how it ties in biblically. Okay, in parallel to this chaos, Iran has been enriching uranium. Their intent's to make a nuclear bomb. And I should say bombs, plural. The United States government has been trying to negotiate with I'm going to call them the satanic Iranian Ayatollah government. We've been trying to negotiate for more than a decade. And that leads us to a point that each of us needs to understand. That point is that our Western thought process does not align. It never will align with their satanic evil thought process. We try in the West here to think, why would they do what they're doing? It's crazy they would do this. And we can't even try to think that way because they don't think that way. You cannot negotiate diplomatically or politically with Satan himself. They don't think like we do. They don't value life like we do. We'll get to more of that in a moment. But we got to finish up this nuclear discussion. Last year, during the 12-day war, the United States sends B-2 stealth bombers. Those have to be the coolest looking toys in our military. They send them on a 36-hour flight from Missouri in the United States all the way to Iran, drop some bombs, and fly back. The goal was to take out their nuclear infrastructure. If you kept up with it, that event ended the 12-day war in 2025, but it didn't do the damage we thought it did. The goal was to take out the nuclear facilities, but it didn't take them out. It didn't wipe out their uranium stockpiles. It didn't fully take out their facilities. Okay, fast forward 9 months to now, and Iran has enough uranium for 11 nuclear bombs. 11. And again, this is not speculation by Jason or by some story on Google or by ChatGPT. This is how Iran themselves entered the discussions with American diplomats. This was their negotiating stance. And this is important to understand. When you think, hey, they were trying to negotiate. Why did we go to war? They're evil. They showed up at the negotiation table saying, we got enough uranium for 11 nuclear weapons. Do what we say or we're going to start using them. And if you think that they wouldn't use them, look at what they're doing to their friends. So here's the reality. If the United States and Israel did not attack when we did, Iran could have devastated the entire Middle East and even into Europe with 11 nukes. They literally have the power to reach half of the world with nukes. So I don't know about you, but for me, I'm willing to suffer some higher gas pricing for a few months to stop an evil regime that could change the map structure of the world with the push of a button. And the thing is, they won't stop there. Their goal is to be able to do that and shoot a nuke to the U.S. And we're probably not that far away from them being able to do that if we don't attack. Now, again, I said this a minute ago, but if you don't think they'll do this, I think you've missed who they are. If we try to rationalize this with our Western mindsets, we will never rationalize that they would use nuclear weapons for mass destruction. However, we would also expect that Iran would never turn on all of its friends, right? But on day one of this war, this current bombing campaign, Iran started bombing any and all neighbors. Countries that just one day earlier were considered their friends. I'm going to give you two examples. Qatar and the UAE. UAE meaning United Arab Emirates. Two examples. They have bombed 12 friendly countries. But let's just look at these two to show you how idiotic that is for them. Qatar has housed and protected the leaders of Hamas. Hamas has been built up and funded by Iran for many years. Iran admits that. The world knows that. And Qatar has housed and protected their leaders. Qatar was helping Iran buy time with the negotiation talks between Iran and the U.S. up to the moment the bombings began. So Qatar is literally helping Iran, literally helping them with their negotiating stall tactics. And Iran turns on them. Why would they do that? What about the UAE, United Arab Emirates? You hear of places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi. They're part of that country. Specifically, specifically Dubai. Ton of bombings. Well, here's the thing. The banking system in Dubai is the only banking system in the world that would allow Iranian money to pass through. The banking system in Dubai is the only banking system in the world that allows Iranian money to pass freely through their system. Because of these banking systems, Iran is able to fund their proxies. So why in the world would Iran bomb those two countries? That's just two. Their other ones are friends, but I'm just taking two examples where they're very good friends. Why would Iran bomb them? And by the way, a political discussion might be, well, they're just bombing U.S. bases in those countries. That's not true. We're talking about Iranian suicide drones flying into the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world in Dubai, flying into hotels, flying into their airports. Why would they do this? Why would Iran turn on their friends? And this is going to be the fun part of the discussion for me. Thank you for bearing with me to get through a little bit of history to get to this point. But we got to answer the why for all this. Why would they hate Israel so much? Why would they want to do mass destruction in the world? Why would they turn on a neighbor and a friend? And to answer these questions, we've got to turn to biblical, religious facts, ideology to explain. First of all, we have to realize they don't think like we do. I've said that multiple times. They do not think like we do. But this fight between Iran and Israel didn't start in 1979. It didn't start in 2023. It didn't start in 2025. It started all the way back in the days of Abraham. That's how biblical this is. If you remember, Abraham got ahead of God's plan. He had a child with Sarah's maidservant. And that produced a problem that still haunts us. We have to start here understanding that this is a biblical problem. This is not a political, it's not a regional, it's not a diplomatic problem. Sarah's maidservant Hagar produces a son named Ishmael. Then Sarah, as we know from the story, ultimately produces a son named Isaac. The nation of Israel, the promise, stems out of the bloodline of Isaac. We've spent several weeks talking about that recently. However, we need to look at a few scriptures to get a full perspective of the story. In Genesis 16, verses 10 through 12, the angel of the Lord appears to Hagar. And I'm going to read this. It says, starting in verse 10, I will give you, this is the angel of the Lord talking to Ishmael's mother, Hagar, I will give you more descendants than you can count. Man, that sounds a lot like the promise that was made to Sarah and Abraham about Isaac, right? So the angel of the Lord appears to Hagar and says, I will give you more descendants than you can count. So we got this promise that was made for the descendants of Isaac, but now we got this promise we don't talk about a lot that was made for the descendants of Ishmael. Verse 11, and the angel also said, you are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael, which means God hears. For the Lord has heard your cry of distress. The son of yours will be a wild man. I want you to hear these next words. The son of yours will be a wild man, as untamed as a wild donkey. He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against his relatives. I want you to remember that. He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will raise their fist against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against his relatives. Okay, so next, Abraham sends Ishmael off into the wilderness with his mother Hagar. Ishmael's about to die of thirst, but God miraculously provides a well of water to provide life for Ishmael. In Genesis 21, verses 14 through 19, we read, so Abraham got up early the next morning, prepared food in a container of water, and strapped them on Hagar's shoulders. Then he sent her away with their son, this is Ishmael, and she wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba. Verse 15, when the water was gone, she put the boy in the shade of a bush. Then she went and sat down by herself about 100 yards away. She said, I don't want to watch the boy die, as she burst into tears. So they've run out of water. Ishmael's about to die. Verse 17, but God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, Hagar, what's wrong? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies here. Go to him and comfort him, for I will make a great nation from his descendants. Guys, that's the promise reinforced. That's the second time. She's promised twice that her son Ishmael will make a great nation. Verse 19, then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well full of water. She quickly filled her water container, gave the boy a drink. Okay, guys, so we see God make a promise. He has promised that his people, the Jewish nation of Israel, will descend from Isaac. But he has also promised Hagar that Ishmael will become a great nation. For simplicity's sake, and just go with me until I get through the rest of this explanation. But for simplicity's sake, let's just say that this is the beginning of the Arab nation or nations versus the Jewish nation. Do you see how this is forming out? We're going to make this simple generalization for today. Now fast forward to Jacob and Esau. Remember those? That's Isaac's sons. Esau is the firstborn to Isaac, is the one that the nation of Israel should stem from. However, Esau willingly sells his birthright to Jacob for food. Bread and stew, there's a whole lesson in there. He gets impatient, he gets hungry, he has these worldly physical needs, and he sells out his birthright to his brother Jacob. So instead of the nation of Israel coming out of Esau, it now comes out of Jacob. Jacob is renamed Israel. Okay, and that's where we follow the story. We follow the story from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Joseph, etc. But what about Esau? What happened to him? After Esau gets tricked out of the blessing, he vows to kill Jacob. That's an important point. I'm going to lay this out, and I'm going to tie this back into Ishmael. Genesis 27, verse 41 says, from that time on, Esau hated Jacob because their father had given Jacob the blessing. And Esau began to scheme, I will soon be mourning my father's death. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. So Esau hates him, wants to kill him. Then in Genesis 28, verses 8 and 9, we read, it was now very clear to Esau that his father did not like the local Canaanite women. So Esau visited his uncle Ishmael's family. This is a key verse that we often just gloss over. So again, we're in Genesis 28. Now we're in verse 9. So Esau visited his uncle Ishmael's family and married one of Ishmael's daughters, in addition to the wives he already had. So I want to tie all this together. God says Ishmael will live in open hostility against all of his relatives, wild, untamed. But God does promise a great nation from Ishmael, from his descendants. Now Esau hates Jacob, Israel, vows to kill Jacob. Esau marries Ishmael's daughter. So now we have a promised nation of many descendants that will live in open hostility with Israel. We've got all these many descendants that hate and want to kill Israel. Is this sounding familiar? Islam doesn't come to be a religion until much later. But this problem with the Arab neighbors coming against the nation of Israel is a biblical problem starting in Genesis, not a current Iran versus Israel diplomatic or political problem or U.S. problem. If you look at the scriptures I just laid out, you look at this biblically, you would say, of course this is happening. Unfortunately, only a few people are really looking at it biblically. Most people are looking at it politically or how it affects my pocketbook. Some are looking at it from the standpoint of Ezekiel 38, where there's a promised war when Iran or Persia, Russia, Turkey, etc., they come against Israel. We'll talk more about that next time, but no one is realizing that there's no way to avoid this. When you see this as a Genesis biblical issue. Again, we'll address the Ezekiel 38 thing next week. But we need to get our minds off trying to rationalize diplomacy. We need to get our minds off a threat from a political perspective. From a military or political perspective. I guess you could say that. I meant military. This was set up in Genesis. This is unavoidable. I am not saying that this particular conflict, this particular war is not unavoidable. There are times of peace. In fact, there's a time of temporary sort of fake peace between Jacob and Esau in Genesis 33. And we've seen many temporary fake peace situations with Israel and its neighbors. My point is that this is a biblical issue. It's not a physical issue. It's not a political issue. It's not a diplomatic issue. It's not a nuclear issue. Chaos between the Arab nations and Israel is unavoidable. Hatred between Esau, the Arabs, and Jacob, Israel, is unavoidable. Now let's enter the satanic religion of Islam. Add this to the mix, and we got all sorts of chaos. We're going to enter in this satanic religion of Islam as we finish up today's part of the discussion. Many of us don't know this. And guys, if you have tuned out, please tune back in because this is one of the most important points I'm about to make. For Islam to come to be in existence many, many years after this Genesis fight, many years after Jesus died and was resurrected, an angel of light, I think we'd say a false angel of light named Satan, but an angel of light, a false angel of light named Satan comes to a man named Muhammad, gives him a vision, gives him instructions, and Islam begins. But here's a very important part of Islam that we don't talk about much. Most people don't even know this. Most Christians don't know this. Islam has an end times Messiah, just like Christianity does. In fact, this is potentially will blow your mind. They believe Jesus is a part of it. Does that surprise you? Let me explain. We have to remember that Jesus is a prophet in Islam. He is our Savior. He is our Messiah. He is the Son of God, half or equal human, equal God. He died on the cross. He is our Messiah. He's our Savior. He's our healer. He's our deliverer. That's Christianity. But in Islam, he's a figure as well. He's a man that lived, but he's a prophet to them in Islam. He's a great prophet. And they believe he will rise from the dead to help usher in their Messiah. So Jesus is a part of their end times. That's why this thing's going to be so confusing at the end. They literally believe that he will rise from the dead to help usher in their Messiah. Their Messiah is called the Mahdi. It's actually pronounced Mahdi. But here's a huge point. They believe the Mahdi will be ushered in through the chaos of a holy war. Did you hear that, and are things starting to click? They believe their Mahdi, their Messiah, will be ushered in through the chaos of a holy war. So we got this thing that started way back in Genesis between Ishmael and Isaac. Then we got this separation between Jacob and Esau wants to kill Jacob, and then Esau marries into Ishmael's family. So now we got this great nation that becomes Israel, many descendants, and then we got this great nation of Arabs that fall under this hatred from Esau, the Ishmael line that's promised to be a big line. And then we fast forward several thousand years, and Islam comes into play. And then they have this end times revelation of a Messiah called the Mahdi. And the Mahdi, who will be ushered in by Jesus, obviously a misunderstood Jesus, and it's a false Jesus. It's not our Jesus. But he only comes back through the chaos of a holy war. So we had a question earlier about why would Iran start attacking its neighbors? Why would Iran turn on its friends? Why would Iran turn on Qatar and UAE, some of its best friends, countries that help them daily? And again, I restate, you cannot rationalize this. But their religion believes that their Messiah will be ushered in through the chaos of a holy war. Therefore, they want to create chaos. They want to create as much chaos as possible with a group of people they are biblically destined to hate forever. And this also explains why they will fight to the death as America and Israel bomb them into oblivion. We are systematically destroying their nation. And you go, it's crazy they won't give up. No, they can't give up. They're looking for the Mahdi to come, their Messiah. In fact, it's pretty well known that Khamenei, the Ayatollah that was just killed on the first day of this iteration of the war, here in 2026, it's well known that he considered himself invincible. Their religion, their Islamic religion, said the Ayatollah would be invincible. Allah would protect him. And all it took was about 10 seconds of God's people trying to prove that Allah is a fraud. So guys, this will never make sense to us. But I hope it helps you understand why it's happening. And next week, we're going to pick up here because we got much more to cover. Because we are not fighting a regional war with political or diplomatic implications. We are in the middle of a biblical war between two brothers that will be great nations. And between two brothers that are promised to hate each other and always, remember I told you to hang on that term, they will always be in open hostility toward each other. Guys, I gave you this straight from Scripture. Do you want to be known by Jesus? Make sure you're on the right side of this biblical fight. Be sure that you're supporting the correct brother, so to speak. Isaac, Jacob, Israel. The side that supports and prays for Israel. God's promised people, land, and nation. His chosen people, land, and nation. Sure, I'm glad we covered this in detail the last couple of episodes back. Guys, make sure that we're following the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, not the false God of Allah that stems out of Ishmael and Esau.
May the Lord bless and keep you. May His grace and His face shine upon you. May the Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. And give you peace. May the Lord bless and keep you. May His grace and His face shine upon you. May the Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. And give you peace. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er panav ilecha v'yihunecha. Yisa Adonai panav ilecha v'yasim lecha shalom. V'yasim lecha shalom. This is the way you shall be blessed from day to day. He'll be your rest. So may the Lord bless and keep you. May His grace and His face shine upon you. May the Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. And give you peace. And give you peace. And give you peace.
We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Please share this podcast with those you know so that we can make sure that each of us will be known by Jesus. If you would like to give to our ministry and support our continued ability to provide this podcast, or if you would like to purchase the book, Will Jesus Know You?, please see the links in the description. We appreciate your support, we appreciate your prayers, and we hope that you will continue to follow Jesus with us as we strive to be known by Him.